Yeah.
So
So that's what he's gonna pay, plus he has clock on the edges. Oh, yeah.
2.5 acres
Feeling.
of land.
Merry Christmas to
One
you.
rock.
Yes, exactly. Very, very.
Unfortunately, that road is kind of prime people.
I'm looking for my kitchen and my bathroom. I think it will warm it up because it's a lot of bare floor.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, so the only thing that's carpeted is my bedroom.
People that
Everything else
took the
is
bars off the
there.
windows here, they don't understand why we have
Yeah.
bars on windows.
I've been on beds because I will have to Google, see which one is close.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started as soon as our YouTube folks are on. Can take our seats. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Holy and loving God, we give you thanks for this day. Thank you for being part of your creation, that you love every part and every mystery of creation. Thank you for scripture and community where we can study and learn together to learn how to better worship and follow you. We pray that you would bless us today in that pursuit. We pray in your most holy name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, come on in. Good to be with you today. If you didn't hear last week, Father Tom is traveling today. It's his annual custom. He flies up and then drives down with Deanne. So they have both their cars down here. So he is not able to be with you today, be with us today. And I'm excited because I really wanted to teach Job, but Tom's a rector. So he, and he really, I think, has a passion for Job like I do. I think like a lot of folks who've studied the book before. I know just overhearing a few talks, some of us may be like, oh, thank God, we're almost done. Job is not everyone's favorite. And at least part of it is, I think, having a good teacher to help us navigate the book of Job, because it's a complex piece of literature. The way it was put together and is regarded by secular authorities, I think, is one of the greatest works of literature in the Western canon, or however you want to establish it, up there with Homer and Virgil and others. But it's, again, a book that you need a guide. And what I did in my preparation the last few days, I went back to my professor from Candler, who is an expert on Job, has written at least 2 books and other articles, like in the New Interpreter's Bible, the commentary on Job. Her name's Carol Newsom. And so a lot of what I'll be sharing is really, I can't give all the citations because it would just be one long citation. But I read and digested, hopefully put in my words what I studied. And her book, if you want extra credit, is called The Contest of the Moral Imagination. And it's by Carol Newsom. It's on the book of Job. It's at a pretty high level, more graduate school. So you've got to really want to read it. And I may have mentioned before, I audited a semester of Job with her at Candler. So it's, again, a big book. And today, what we're going to be covering are what are known as the divine discourses, or the speeches of God. And they're really one of 3 parts of the book, which, sorry if this is redundant of what Tom already went over, but there's called different things, but the prose tale or folk tale, which is the first opening part of Job and the ending of Job. Some scholars, like Carol, thinks that was all one story at one point, and kind of everything turns out in the end type of story. So it's got a point of view, and it's not like that's a bad point of view, it's just incomplete. And then I think a lot of the beauty is the back and forth between Job and what have been come to be known as Job's counselors or Job's friends. And they're debating, really, how do you see the world? How does the world work, especially in relationship to God? How do we understand suffering when bad things happen? Is that because we've done something wrong or God's angry? So that's a big portion of it, the biggest portion. And then what we're going to cover today, again, as I said, are the divine discourses. And depending how we engage it, we can feel different about what we hear there as well. So I'll do a little opening talk about that, and then I'll read a lot of it like I do, but we'll also have time where I'll, again, do some lecture but I also want to hear from you. So before I start that part, any questions where we are? Tom said we're up through chapter 37. So I know we've been moving pretty fast apparently, but anything from what we've done so far that you want to put on the table before we move on to God's talking to Job? Everybody's switching in their book. I know Hutch had said, we're where? But I think what Thomas said, you tell me if I'm right, is kind of read ahead and we're going to cover more at the higher level, the way he's been teaching. Is that accurate? Okay. Or I'm not seeing a hand. So, oh, I'm sorry. Did you have one?
No.
What you'll see, I don't know how many people have read 38 through 42. So you've read ahead. And part of what you'll notice in this one-way communication, for the most part, Job does a couple of short responses, is that difference in identity between who God is and who Job is. And the difference in identity obviously is around what God, our understanding of God, the power, the wisdom of God to plan and maintain what we see or understand as the universe or creation. And so we've heard this phrase, God is God and Job is not, or we can put our name in there as well. But I think it's also important as we read through it that we don't see it as God being the bully, just saying, flicking you away and I'm God, just shut up. Because I don't think that's it either. And part of it, if I was an actor, I'm a professional speaker, but how the tone is that we hear God's voice. So I'm going to keep it fairly neutral. I mean, you can get kind of cheesy with it or do your God voice. But I think how we hear it in our mind is what matters. What is the tone beyond the speech tone, but how do you think God is speaking? There are different ways. It could be mockery. Some have said it's got at least elements of that, or overpowering mastery, God is God again, or some type of pedagogical, God's trying to help Job understand just with all of his suffering and all he's been through and all his questions, to give, again, a different perspective based on this connection he's made between God directly and with Job. And as we read through it, one thing you may have noticed when you read on your own is that it's got all these very intense visual images. So, the words are used to describe things in creation, especially to help us see, again, that difference between who God is and who we are. And then a point of view that Carol Newsom takes is this sense of the sublime, that part of what we're going through in Job, including his suffering and definitely this encounter with God, is this exposure to what is beyond us. And sublime, we kind of use perhaps loosely about, just something we really like, but sublime being something transcendent beyond us that draws us in, and yet at the same time can scare us. So, that sense of maybe what you might see, in some beautiful storm, if you've ever been out in the wilderness, which will come up as well, and you see these clouds coming and lightning, and you see all this occurring, and you're both engaged and just mesmerized almost, but also if you're in the storm, you can get killed. And both of those things are true. And so that's part of what Job is going through, because again, God is speaking out of a storm. And I always like to look at the Hubble telescope shots. And, who put this together didn't have access to Hubble telescope. But if you go out and see some of the things that we're blessed to see because of technology and say, okay, that's the same God that, we're going to also worship in the manger in a few weeks. So, God's pretty big, and our understanding of God can only take in so much. But our understanding has to include what we know about creation, which this poem will go through. But again, the sublime is based on this encounter with something beyond us that, again, both attracts us and scares us. But what the sublime can help us do is understand who we are in a different way. And that's part of what the Job conversation is about, that Job, in his view, rightfully understands the world a certain way, and we're learning, as good as we all like Job's way of seeing the world, it's not complete. Yeah, Louise.
You're touching now on something that I don't think I've actually formed cloudy in my mind, but as I was reading these chapters, and I had to read them both in the Message and in my Jerusalem Bible, because
Okay,
both of them are very beautiful, but I wanted to get it in my own language to see if that would have
Sure.
any effect on my understanding. And it did kind of, because you were talking about the God of power that is so big and mysterious, but also scary. And something I got from God spending quite a bit of time talking about the two beastly one.
yeah, we're gonna get to that,
and a
yeah.
lot about Leviathan. And what I got from that was a sense of protection from God. Like, do you really want to mess with evil and fear at this level? Or do you want to let me do it with you?
Okay, that's one point of view.
It was a new twist for me. The times that I've read Job and talked about Job,
Right.
I never got the sense that God was also saying to Job, let me do this. I can do it. You can't.
Yeah.
Not only I'm God and you're not, but
Yeah, that there's a place in the cosmos that God, of course, is the center of, or the cosmos exists within God, but also that those things that are scary to us that we label as evil aren't evil in God's mind. And that may be the mind-blowing part. So, if we're in a tornado and we get hurt or killed, we call that evil, not necessarily the way God sees it. And that's mind-blowing. That's not my world. It's like, whoa. And that's what the whole book's kind of about, is us trying to get beyond, well, if a bad thing happens, it's because I did something wrong or God's mad. And God in this discourse, these two discourses, is going to say, nope, that's not the way to look at it. So it's going to be that chaos. There's an ordered universe, but the chaos exists within it, and God's okay with it. So anyway, it's kind of critiquing a Near Eastern alternative mythology of, that God is taming chaos, and that's how we came into existence. That it's bigger than that in the way Job explains it. The chaos is not an enemy. It's part of creation, which is scary. Again, because anyone like chaos? I mean, in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., they were the bad guys. But I mean, on that whole sense of what's wrong, we do a lot, again, and that's going to be part of the lecture ongoing, but how do we see things that we can't control? And then what do we construct as ways to control things? And then how does God say, you're kind of putting your energy in the wrong things? So a couple of things. Yeah, I'm sorry, Jack, sorry.
I'm sitting here smiling because, like Lisa, I read the message and the NIV version. And just the way it starts out, I actually broke out laughing. This is the message you're saying. Pull yourself together, Job. Put on your feet. Stand tall. Well, it's sort of like, pull up your big boy pants, buddy.
It is.
And the image throughout, for me, and the message is really more personal. I mean, I love the way he changes the words and all that throughout. So several places in here, I just almost broke out laughing.
Good.
So,
Yeah, that's a great sign that you're reading deeply. And some of it is Eugene Peterson's poetic gifts, the man who wrote the message. So to make it real for us in our setting, in our situation. One thing I always like to talk about when I teach about Job is God bless Job's friends. And I think rightfully they get a lot of the criticism, but remember, Job's friends represent us, religious folks, and that we are trying to defend God. And again, that will unfold, I'm sure, Tom, and you have already explored that some, but remember, that's part of what, again, God, especially toward the end, is going to talk about that. But the main thing, just to be clear, is that it's a refutation of pretty much everything Job's friends say. It's not that some parts don't have some elements of truth. Of course they do. I always say it's like the 80% rule, that these things kind of work most of the time, but not all of the time. So if they don't work all the time, that if a good thing comes from you doing a good thing, that does work a lot of times, but it's not an absolute. And especially there's not retributive justice built into creation, which is what Job's friends are saying, that through both what happened, remember, to his family and all of his wealth, that's not because Job sinned, right? That was kind of their key point, and that God is just, And if that happened, for God to be just, you had to have done something wrong. God says, no, God doesn't really even directly address that, but everything that God says is kind of building a new context or a new sense of reality. But, Job is not an absolute good guy. I mean, he's a person with great faith and someone to be admired, but in his darkness, when he's lost everything and has all this illness, he cries out to God and says, well, nothing makes sense. And God also critiques that things do make sense, but not the sense that you've made of them in the past. So as people of faith, what Job challenges us to do is how do we understand who God is in a different way? Not totally different, but in a broader way. And of course, we'll never fully understand God. That's why we worship. And again, what we understand as the sublime is at least our way of knowing God's different. We need to connect with God in this humility, honesty. There's stuff I don't understand. There's mystery, and yet God's involved in our lives. So it's a both and, but not maybe our simplest way of understanding God. Like the prose tale, or that beginning part, end part, is kind of it's almost done ironically, but because of all the in-between part. But basically the message there is all's well that ends well. Job ends up getting much more of everything. Ain't life grand? Sure, it was hard for a while, but and that's not if we go away with that being the point, we kind of miss the point, would be my, not mine, but other experts beyond me. What Job basically is trying to argue for is that there is meaning in a just world. And what a professor told me back in college when we studied Job in world literature or something is, everything has to make sense. And the term he used is a vending machine view of life. I put in my quarter, I get my Coke, or you can tell that was a long time ago, put in my $2 and get my Coke, that there's a sense of, it makes sense. So from a religious point of view, that means, well, I go to church, I give my tithe, I study the Bible, I pray, I'm a good person, which was Job, but kind of on steroids, right? So he was very righteous, but then bad stuff happens, and so, well, that's not the deal. Well, that's life. So, when we encounter those things that, in our view, Job's view, aren't part of the deal, how do we understand God? And so some people say, well, God's not real. Or people say, well, this just doesn't make sense. Or is there a deeper way of understanding who we are and especially who God is? And again, I'm moving a little fast before we dive into the text. Did y'all do anything with Elihu, which are the chapters before these? He's a young Turk who gets up and starts telling them how they're all wrong. Good. But anyway, he's part of how most scholars say was an insertion and not part of the original work. And probably from religious folks saying, well, these friends of Job didn't do a real good job. Let's bring in someone else to kind of punch harder. And I think in these divine discourses, we're going to cover more or less ignores Elihu. So what scholars will say is if you take the end of chapter, I think it's 31, and then put it with 38 and cut out the in-between with Elihu, that those chapters of Job's final argument, so to speak, 29, 30, and 31, and juxtapose it with God's response, it makes more sense. So just, if you haven't heard that. But again, God isn't going to engage in Job's argument. He's going to make a new point of view. And again, what we'll hear as we get into chapter 38 now is those questions. Where were you? Can you? Do you know? So again, I think not in a mocking way, but kind of a look at reality way. So we'll read it that way, and y'all can see that differently, of course. Two final things. One is the difference in how God and Job see the wilderness, chaos, the desert. And again, that goes back to the back and forth between Louise and I, is that God likes the wilderness. Have you ever been out in the wilderness by yourself at night without any supplies or guide? not many of us would, right? But it can be scary. And that, of course, bring it to the New Testament, Jesus in the wilderness. That's the scary place where the demons are and the wild animals. But that there's a place in the wilderness that God rejoices in. God made jungles, not gardens, as an analogy or as a metaphor. We like gardens and gardens. I don't think gardens are wrong, but that's not how God does it. And, God put us in charge maybe to help, make gardens. At least that's what we tell ourselves. But I'm not sure. So that's the other thing. Who is not mentioned for the most part in this whole section, 38 through 42? What category of creation is pretty much not addressed? Human beings. Who said that, Louise? So humans, he addresses Job, and then he goes into a speech, or God goes into a speech. Doesn't talk a lot about humans, and he even talks about the, kind of the king of creation. Not us. It's that scary monster. So take that for what you will. So let's get into the text with chapter 38 while I'm sharing the screen. Any comments or questions on any of that? Yeah, Hutch. Go ahead, please use the mic. Thank you.
For the most part, did not like the prologue or the epilogue. It's
Right.
kind of an insertion and a distraction.
Right?
But then, as you were talking, I suddenly, especially in the epilogue, that Job ends up even richer than before.
Right.
But in our Christian faith, this is what plays out in the crucifixion and the resurrection.
Right.
I mean, it's better than it was.
Right. Yeah, that's encouraging and not to be ignored, but there's more to it, right? And everything that Jesus went through to bring into the New Testament part of our faith story, it wasn't just for the good stuff. There was something in engaging all the suffering, the passion, that was also a needed thing, not just something to go through for the good stuff, but to be able for Jesus to identify with all those going through suffering, that it's not just God up there telling you what to do. It's God in the trenches with us, so to speak. So I'm going to read it pretty fast. If you want, raise a hand. As Jack said, if anyone was in high school football, you've heard this speech, at least the first part, right? And this is the NRSV, so it's pretty close to the Hebrew translation. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Again, storm is often identified, even in the ancient, before Yahweh became who we understand Yahweh, he was the God who rides on the storm, or the storm god, obviously more than that, but when it was still more of a local deity. And then like Elijah, God spoke, not out of the whirlwind, but there was a storm going on and he spoke in silence. But there's Jesus calming the storm. So there are all these images in the Bible of storm being connected with a divine message or theodicy. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. So again, I'm making a oratory decision on how I'm saying this, and you could say it differently. But the point is, God's encountering Job and is honoring Job, right? So Job has gone through absolute hell. I can't think of one more thing he could have lost, from physical illness to his family, his wife's fussing at him, everything's wrong. And then his friends, to their credit, sat with him in silence for 7 days. I think that should be a requirement for all Stephen ministers or clergy. But, then they've been nagging at him. So he is at the lowest of the low. He's lost everything. He's angry, I think. And God encounters him in a way that makes him stand up, pay attention. And that's a sign of honor, that God sees Job as a worthy conversation partner, so to speak, even though he's going to be challenging him. So the first part is all around creation, and especially the boundaries of creation, the things that we're in the middle of or just see from a distance. So where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Well, even in 21st century modern science, we got theories, but we'd say, no, I don't know. We have good thoughts, probably better than them, but so much we don't know. Who determined its measurements? So some of the imagery is going to be, from that culture and day, that the universe would be in this kind of contained cubit. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? So again, using this imagery of construction. And I love this. Rachel would love it. When the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. And in this image, you really need to know how the sea is seen in Hebrew culture. How's the sea perceived if you're a Jew in the Old Testament? Is it a friendly place? Chaos, scary. The Hebrews were not known as great seafaring people. That was the Phoenicians. One of their great miracles is going through the sea, not over it. So with all that understanding, as you hear Job, how scary the sea is, who shut the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? What Carol said is that God is the sea's midwife. So not only is God not afraid of the sea, but it's one of God's children. So if you see the sea as chaotic and scary, it's not that to God. And then it goes even more in this kind of real mothering image. When I made the clouds, its garment, and thick darkness, its swaddling band. So this newborn baby that you swaddle, that you hold, it's still scary because what he's using for those things is thick darkness. So God is giving birth, or is the midwife to the sea, and prescribed bounds for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stopped. So again, not a criticism. Sea's cool, but God keeps this chaos in its place. Verse 12, have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, so that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and it is dyed like a garment. Light is withheld from the wicked, and their uplifted arm is broken. So this imagery of night and day, and how the sun, when the light comes in the morning, gets the wicked to go out of their places they've been hiding to do their mischief. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, verse 16, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this. And again, all these scary things for me or you or Job aren't scary. It's like this is God's neighborhood. God knows all this stuff, and God likes it. And we don't, for the most part. Verse 19, where is the way to the dwelling of light? And where is the place of darkness that you may take to its territory, that you may discern the paths to its home? Surely you know, you were born then, for you were born then, and the number of your years is great. That's, I think, where God is, if not mocking, maybe helping Job realize his place in creation. And again, these border places, things we don't understand. Scientists today understand it pretty well, but in that day, the mystery of verse 22, have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail? These things that happen in creation, sometimes friendly, but often unfriendly to us, which God, had reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war. So this imagery of God casting hailstones in times of conflict. What is the way to the place where the light is distributed, or where the east wind is scattered upon the earth? So again, this is poetry, remember. It's not a textbook, thank God. So it's giving you these images from nature. And then one thing humans do is we cut channels, either for transporting things, navigating between rivers or seas, or for irrigation purposes. And God does that just with rain. So all that we put energy into engineering, which again is not bad, is kind of played on here through nature. Who has cut a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt to bring rain on a land where no one lives, on the desert which is empty of human life, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground put forth grass? Has the rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the hoarfrost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. So all these things beyond human control that God kind of manages for us, and almost in spite of us. We're part of this whole. And then he moves it to what they would think of as the sky, to space. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season, or can you guide the bear with its children? It's all these constellations. Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on the earth? And so we'll keep, I'll skip ahead just for the sake of time, but you get the sense of this beauty. One thing in verse 36, who has put wisdom in the inward parts? That's where God at least refers back to humans, that we have something within us that helps us at least try or begin to understand all this mystery. That there is a wisdom that God uses to help us connect with this creation. Verse 39 through 41 is kind of a lovely imagery that's referred to in the Sermon on the Mount, the last part. Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their covert? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? Does that remind you of anything? Cares for the birds in the field, the birds, that God knows every bird that falls to the ground. So again, that nature imagery, poetic imagery of how God cares for things that we probably don't even think about unless we're scientists. So that's chapter 38. That kind of sets the tone. And that's kind of the big picture. 39 will start getting more specific. And then 40 and 41, as we mentioned with Leviathan and Behemoth, get very specific. But just taking a pause there, what questions or observations on any of that?
The imagery is astoundingly beautiful, I think.
It is. It really is. If you didn't hear Hutch say, the imagery is astoundingly beautiful. And I think that's what most, just objective people, whether they're people of faith, would say is this is some good writing here. And it gives us a sense of who God is. Landon has his hand up. Yes, sir.
This is kind of very much beyond the point. Verse 3, I just got lost in verse 3 because it says, gird up your loins like a man.
Right.
And
got to give him a break. It's 2,500 years old.
everything else was beautiful, and that just ruined it for me.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, and there are other translations that take the gender specificity out. I think what Jack said in the Message, it was different, like stand up. It wasn't to gird up your loins, but yeah. I mean, it's an image, it's a metaphor, and I'm not a fighter either, but yeah, the imagery is definitely of the warrior. What I've read, I don't know firsthand, but because of their garb, you would, gird up your skirt so you can fight and not be, vulnerable to someone grabbing it. So yeah, I hear it. Good point. But it is 2,500 years old, plus or minus. So we'll give a little grace, or I will. I hope you will. What other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Hutch.
I like the opening line that God appears from the heart of a tempest. And as you point out, the tempest represents chaos.
Right.
And to me, chaos also represents randomness, chance. And I think for creation to be authentic, randomness has to be part of it. If the creation is a perfect order, it almost becomes a painting, static, and therefore this element of randomness, if authenticity is to be there, has to be present.
Right.
And God chose to make some order out of randomness, but chaos still is part of creation.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part. And, just again, using a human metaphor, if you're an artist, if you are trying to paint for the first time and you're so worried about making a mistake and you just keep focusing on what you're trying to do, an artist will say no and just wipe it off and start over, or throw the canvas away because they're in a different place creatively. And, that's just a metaphor, but God, and how, and I'm not saying how God does it, but there seems to be things that we don't understand that are beyond us, that are part of what is needed to make creation what creation is and the beauty. And that can be scary and tragic. I mean, there are things that are tragic, not to dismiss those, because they're, when someone dies too soon, or, the tsunami, that wasn't because of any moral misbehavior, unless you want to say development is misbehavior. So, there are things that happen that are tragic, and that's part of reality. And, the adding to the tragedy is when we try and explain the tragedy and say, well, those people were bad, they're sinners because of that. And that's when you compound tragedy. So let's keep going. Any other comments? Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Scott.
Yeah, I just wonder that isn't God reminding Job that his view of God it's the Philip Yancey, your God is too small.
Yeah.
And even though you're kind of a smart guy, I'm reminding you, you don't even have any idea of how amazing I am.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if Job, and again, not to justify or explain or any type of suffering, Job is only able to have this confrontation because of all he's been through, because his world's gotten blown up. And if he was a guy that sacrificed every day and did everything right, he would have an understanding of reality that was incomplete. But it was working for him, but everything's gone to pot, so to speak. And now that's opened him up to at least have this encounter with God, if that makes sense. And again, not to say that makes suffering okay, at least from human point of view, but it is. I can't tell you how many people I've said, until I went through this, I didn't get it. And the suffering I've been through, nothing like Job's, but it changes you. So again, I'm not saying in suffering grand, but it is what it is. It's reality.
But does that mean you have to suffer in order to be able to talk with God?
No, but it seems that helps us engage God, at least in Job's story. I don't know our own individual experiences, but suffering seems to be part of that. And that's the way of the cross. What we remember during Lent and especially Holy Week is the way of the cross. Let's keep reading chapter 39. And I have to do a hard stop right before 11. Sorry, I have another meeting, but we'll get as far as we'll get. Chapter 39. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? And very simple, but they go where you don't see them as humans. Even today, scientists who study that. Do you observe the calving of the deer? So again, these very kind of maternal images. Can you number the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth? Now, again, as modern folks, scientists say, oh yeah, we know that now. And that's not kind of the point, right? The poetry is, there are things we don't understand. These are examples in that day. So how do they give birth? Now this part, let's go down to verse 5, is really, I don't know if I ever fully caught it till this most recent reading from Dr. Newsom. Who has let the wild ass go free? Anyone know what a wild ass is? We think of donkeys and mules and so forth, but apparently, and still today, there are parts of the world where these asses run around and they're actually kind of mean. And they're, if you've ever had a domestic donkey, they're known for being contrary from our point of view. But here's what God says: who sets them free? He seems to like them. And the way she describes it, that the wild ass is the symbol of someone who is just doesn't care and is going to do what he's going to do. Well, God has that in creation, to which I've given the steppe for its home, the salt land for its dwelling place. It scorns the tumult of the city. So this one very human thing that is brought up is kind of cast aside. The tumult of the city, the disorder, the oppression is another way it's described, that the city isn't always a friendly place. The wilderness may be, at least in part, to stretch our understanding. This different place that has, the city has things that God questions. Let's see. So the wild ass isn't domesticated, and God's good with that. Verse 9, the wild ox. Again, this animal, we don't know if it's like a water buffalo, which you've read about, they're very scary, but some wild version of what we've domesticated, humans, the ox, the cows, they're not all domesticated. And if you encounter them in the wilderness, they will kill you. So God asked, is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will it spend the night at your crib? Can you tie it in the furrows with ropes, make it do, the work of an ox that's been domesticated? So all those things are questioned, and that this, what civilization is basically, that animals get food and care from humans in exchange for work. The wild ass and the wild ox aren't part of that arrangement. And then this is another kind of funny, where Jack said earlier about laughing, ostrich part is really kind of funny. So anyone know anything about ostriches? Apparently they're kind of crazy, and they're very fast, and they can kill you as well. We see them maybe in the, the petting zoo, but they are one of the fastest animals. Like if we were hunting them, they're hard to catch, even on a horse. Obviously a vehicle can go faster. So it flaps its wings wildly. Then again, this characteristic, which seems crazy in verse 14, it leaves its eggs to the earth and lets them be warmed on the ground, forgetting that a foot may crush them and that a wild animal may trample them. So the ostrich is kind of presented as a bad mother. Again, that's poetic imagery, but it's not doing a real good job of protecting the nest like some other animal might. It deals cruelly with its young. Again, this is poetry. As if they were not its own, though its labor should be in vain, yet it has no fear. And that's kind of the key phrase. This ostrich lives, it's part of God's creation. It has no fear because God has made it forget wisdom. There's a lack of fear that is not always courage, it's just being foolish. And given it no share in understanding, when it spreads its plumes aloft, it laughs at the horse and its rider. So this, again, poetic image of the ostrich being just crazy, wild, enjoying life, but not what we would value. And in Job's argument, this kind of moral order that we're all responsible, doing the right thing, ostrich has no interest in that, and God seems okay with that. So it goes on. There are other things. He's going to talk about the horse. What Carol points out is a lot of what's used to describe the horse are words that are sometimes also used for God. It's majestic, it's mighty, all these things. But a war horse, if you can imagine, I'm sure, is a horse trained especially for battle, so it doesn't get where will get afraid and run away. That war horse is something that has again a part in God's creation. And then it continues in the poetry about hawks and eagles. And if you've ever seen them, in the real world or on YouTube or wherever, how they can see things very high and come into the water and swoop up or on the ground and catch its prey, that all of that is in design of what God has done in creation. Yeah, Hutch.
Back in verse 5 onward, and this whole characterization in these early verses, sort of a man who does not care. It brings me back to Genesis, and Abram sired a son by Agar.
Yeah, he's called a wild ass. I think.
Ishmael, and he's a wild ass of a man.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point, how that has been used poetically before. But the thing to remember, don't humanize it. Don't say a wild ass. These are examples of humans, but it's just the wild ass or the wild ox, that they're part of creation that God likes. God loves these parts of creation that humans, if we see wild, not all of us, but if you see wild horses, wild asses, well, how can we domesticate them? Because that's how they're useful to us. Versus just saying, nope, they're part of creation. They have their own worth independent of what humans can do with them. And so chapter 40, we'll keep going here. Seems God's getting a little testy. Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? Anyone who argues with God must respond. So again, even though he's, pulling, the trump card of being God, he's still asking. So there's respect being shown to Job. Okay, let's go. And then again, we can read this differently. That Job answered the Lord, "See, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but will proceed no further." Now, part of that you can say, well, Job's had all this happen to him, and now he's being shut up by God. Let's put that over there. Another part is this, what I mentioned earlier, Dr. Newsom talks about the sublime. He has seen reality in a broader way now. His eyes are able to see what he didn't see before. And that what some mystics would say is when you have that encounter with God, when you have the sublime experience, the only human response is silence. And that doesn't mean anything more than I have seen, and now I'm just gonna kind of stay in this space of understanding God, or understanding that I don't understand fully. So that's Job's response. We'll have one more response. Yeah, Jack.
The message says, I'm ready to shut up and listen.
Another way of saying it, maybe not quite as elegant in that case, but I love Eugene Peterson. But again, what I hope we don't see is, God's pushed him down, bullied him down. It's more God's respecting him because God's talking to him. Whether we say gird up your loins or just say stand up and pay attention, God's treating Job with respect. And because of that, he's getting to hear things that I've never heard from God. So in this encounter being described poetically, there's a lot of respect. So again, what's the Message version of gird up your loins? Verse 7.
God answered Job next from the eye of the storm, and this is what he said. I have some more questions for you, and I want straight answers.
Okay, but I think what I said earlier, I kind of, even with the sexism, I still like the other poetically. But how do you stand up, pay attention? We're having a talk. Will you even put me in the wrong? Which is what Job has kind of accused God, not kind of has, this doesn't make sense. I've been mistreated because I've done everything right. Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like his? So, again, some of the ways we understand God. And there is, I think you have to say, almost a mockery, whatever tone we want to take as we read it out loud to ourselves, or what I do. Deck yourself with majesty and dignity, clothe yourself with glory and splendor, pour out the overflowings of your anger, and look on all who are proud and abase them. Look on all who are proud and bring them low. Tread down the wicked where they stand, hide them all in the dust together, bind their faces in the world below. Then I will also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can give you victory. So this whole, he's both treating Job with dignity, and he's saying, but there's a dignity beyond you that's reserved to God. And part of what is a key God thing is to abase the proud. What we just heard about John the Baptist, that high places will be brought low. So part of what we're relying on God to do is to set things right one day. It may not be the way we want it set right, the vending machine analogy, but the things will be set right one day. And that kind of taunt toward Job is, can you do that? And of course, the problem when we try and do it is then we become the arrogant because we put down the other arrogant. But God has a way of helping all of us to come to a place of both justice and mercy. So the rest of the discourse here, we'll look at two almost mythic figures, and some scholars spend a lot of time, well, what are these two creatures? And I think that's missing the point. Is it a hippopotamus and an alligator? Who cares? The point is, it's something big and something we can't as human beings control. Now, again, modern humans, we got guns and stuff, but typically, and if we're out without a gun, these are creatures beyond us. So to read that, look at behemoth, which I made just as I made you. That's almost underline that, just as I made you. Humans, I joke that we are kind of like the, I'm sorry to all the first children, we're like the firstborn. Well, yeah, it's all about us, or maybe the youngest. I'm the youngest, so I can critique myself. It's not, we're all part of the family. So it's not humans. Now we're unique in the sense we believe as Christians, God became human and dwelt among us in Jesus. But we're all God's children, including the behemoth. It eats grass like an ox. Its strength is in its loins and its power in the muscles of its belly. It makes its tail stiff like cedar. The sinews of its thighs are knit together. Its bones are tubes of bronze and its limbs like bars of iron. So this, again, appreciative description of this animal that scares us to death. It is the first of the great acts of God. Now you can read that at least two ways. One, it's ancient, primordial, or I like behemoth number one. So we're all loved, but like behemoth is really special to God. Only its maker can approach it with a sword. And this one is a little bit hard, that line is hard to translate apparently. For the mountains yield food for it, for all the wild animals play under the lotus plants it lies in the covert of the reeds and in the marsh. The lotus trees cover it for shade. The willows of the wadi surround it. Even if the river is turbulent, it is not frightened. It is confident though Jordan rushes against its mouth. Can one take it with hooks or pierce its nose with a snare? So again, these rhetorical questions, that there's something that in this chapter 40, God, the author uses God's voice to say, this is something I've created. I love it. Thoughts on that or questions on any of that? And if you're online, I can't see all of you, so just speak up if you have a question. Now, Dr. I'm sorry, Louise, and if,
Just quickly, in the,
have we given up on the mic?
in the message.
Thank you.
In the message, it comes back that I created behemoth,
Right,
but I lead him like a lamb.
right.
So again, the things that we fear, God has control over.
I got this, in other words, yeah.
I like it. It's sort of what I was talking about
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and again, what the author didn't have as a resource to draw from poetically is what we all know scientifically. So you can look at my Facebook page, all the Hubble photographs that are kind of set up for each day in Advent. And that's just some really remarkable stuff. And I've had conversations with folks, well, how can you believe in God when you see all this? I mean, it's so much obviously bigger than Earth and, our imagery of, God's up here. So how can you not believe in God when you see all these things? But, that's a point of conversation with folks. But that, and then to think all of this expanding universe kind of exists almost like in the womb of God is one imagery. That God is beyond even all these things beyond us. All right, chapter 41, can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? And again, for the purpose, imagine a big old dragon or crocodile. Rhetorical question, no. Or press down its tongue with a cord. I think of almost like a tongue depressor. That's probably not going to happen. Can you put a rope in its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? So all these ways of domesticating, animals, using animals for food, fish, or animals we trap. Will it make many supplications to you? In other words, you who rule nature, Leviathan doesn't acknowledge your reign. Will it speak soft words to you? Will it make a covenant with you to be taken as your servant forever? So in other words, to be domesticated. Will you play with it as with a bird? Or will you put it on leash for your girls? Will traders bargain over it? Will they divide it among the merchants? Can you fill its skin with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? Lay hands on it, think of the battle, you will not do it again. Any hope of capturing it will be disappointed. We're not even the gods overwhelmed at the sight of it. So again, think of it as a mythic figure. Don't try and tie it down to earth as a crocodile or whatever. So it's bigger than even the gods, not Yahweh, but the other gods that have been worshipped. No one is so fierce as to dare to stir it up. Who can stand before it? Who can confront it and be safe under the whole heaven? Who? I will not keep silence concerning its limbs. And in this part, God's really like praising this creature or its mighty strength or its splendid frame. Who can strip off its outer garment? Who can penetrate its double coat of mail? Who can open the doors of its face? There is terror all about its teeth. Its back is made of shields and rows, shut up closely as with a seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. So again, all this imagery, that's why people think of crocodile or dragon. They're joined, and we'll keep going. It sneezes, flash forth light. So, it's pretty scary. Keep going. And you can read this later if you haven't already. Got to get to the end here. We don't need to read all of it. So let's go down to verse 33. On earth, it has no equal, a creature without fear. It surveys everything that is lofty. It is king over all that are proud. So again, this imagery that it's beyond, even human control. So that's kind of going to have to be our stopping point. So we'll stop at 41. And there's some great continuing parts, but I have a meeting I have to be at, unfortunately, and that's why I set a timer. I just keep talking. But, and I'm not sure if it'll be Father Tom or me back next week, but one of us will be back. Any just final comments or questions before we go in peace? So love creation, God does. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thank you, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. We'll probably be